I will be there in just a moment. It was funny, Mary Nell leaned over to me and said, I wonder if Don realizes he got up 5 minutes late. That's what she said to me. So, thanks, Mary Nell, I appreciate that. She may not have said that, by the way. But good morning, happy Father's Day. I wanted to start by telling you a story. When I was 7 or 8, I remember going to Camp Carter, the YMCA, and it was the first time I was ever going to get to ride a horse by myself. I'd ridden with my dad many times, but this was my first ride. And they picked the most meek and gentle of all the horses and put me on it. It was in a group of about 12 horses, and I remember we started off on this walk. You know how they're all in a line, and you got a cowboy at the front, a cowboy at the back. And we weren't 2 minutes into that ride when my horse broke formation and took off at a gallop. I mean a sprint. And I remember holding on to that saddle and ducking down as low as I could get because crabapple trees were flying over my head. And I was screaming at the top of my lungs, and I guarantee I was crying, and everything I know to do was just to hold on, and the cowboy is chasing after me. That cowboy wasn't going to catch us. And my ride came to an end as Mama Horse trotted back into the stable and stopped next to her baby that she had left that day for the first time. The meek horse that I was riding wasn't meek that day. And there are times in our life where we, who are supposed to turn the reins of our life over to God, want to take them back. The passage we read at the Lord's Supper talks about how we're living sacrifices to God. And the challenge with living sacrifices is that we wriggle off the altar from time to time. And we have to be reminded that meekness is something that we have to focus on every day. This morning I want to talk to you, we're in a series on the Beatitudes, and I want to remind you that most people that we know are chasing after the good life, whatever the good life actually means. What it really is a search for meaning. What will satisfy this longing inside of me? There's a hole in my heart that I'm trying to fill. There's something that doesn't satisfy, and I'm longing for something else. And so I'm chasing after this good life wherever it might be. And it's fascinating to me how TikTok is really the new way for kids to see what others are presenting as the good life. Or we watch television, or we catch Netflix, and it goes on and on and on. And what we discover is for each of us, we are hurrying ourselves through life, trying to chase after things that we know in the end will not satisfy. And so one of the questions I wanted to ask today, and I hope it's not true for you, is, has being tired become part of your personality? Are you just running through life, chasing after something, thinking that I'm just on this sprint to catch up with whatever meaning, whatever value, whatever material there is that's going to finally fix that hole that I have inside of me? I want to remind you that Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount told us, don't satisfy yourself with the good life. Chase after the God life. And he's going to tell us what the God life looks like. And I want us to remember that this is God made flesh speaking to us. This is the great rabbi. This is the logo, the Word of God, that now is presenting to us a way to live that he says will allow you to live the blessed life. You won't always be happy. Not every moment in your life is going to be a 10. It's not all zippity-doo-dah. But you're going to live a life that has joy, that has God's favor, that experiences God's grace, that you know you're walking through life the way God intended for you to live. Jesus says if you want that, it begins with these Beatitudes in the Sermon on the Mount. And what we've discovered is that these Beatitudes are going somewhere, that they're on a trajectory. And so we notice that we began by saying you're living the blessed life when you recognize your own poverty of spirit. When you realize that you spiritually are depleted, that you're bankrupt, that you cannot save yourself, you cannot satisfy your own spiritual desire, you are bankrupt. And then Jesus says you're living the blessed life when you mourn about that. Whoops. And when the things that break God's heart begin to break your heart. Today, what we discover is if you realize that you're spiritually depleted, if you mourn over the things that break God's heart, the next step is to turn the reins of your life over to God. That, we will discover, is what meekness is all about. And so Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." Notice all the people chasing after the good life, trying to win the earth. And Jesus says, the meek life will inherit it. So let's figure out what that means. I want to take you on just a little journey today. We're going to ask the question, what is meekness? And then we're going to ask the question, are there any biblical models of weakness? And then we're going to ask the third question, does Jesus teach us a secret to understanding meekness? And so we jump right in. What is meekness? And what I wanted us to understand is that meekness is not weakness. Meekness rhymes with weakness, and sometimes we think, oh, you don't want to be a meek person. But Jesus was a meek person. And meekness here means that you have a submissive, teachable spirit toward God. That you care about other people, that you're not a dominant type of person, that you're meek. The passage that we read from Zephaniah says that the proud and the exalted ones are going to be laid low. But in verse 12, God says in Zephaniah, I will leave among you a humble, and that word for lowly is the word for meek, a humble and a meek people, and they will take refuge in the name of the Lord. The opposite of pride is meekness. Okay, so do we ever sing this song? I think we do, right? Over all the earth, you reign on high. Have you ever sung, Lord, reign in me, reign in your power over all my dreams? What's funny is every time we sing that song, I start out R-E-I-G-N, reign in me, and then I start thinking about what else I personally need, and that is to be meek. And meekness is asking God to reign in me. In other words, put the bit in my mouth, Lord. You drive. I'll go where you want me to go. Put my strength under your control. That's what meekness is all about, is giving the reins of your life over to God. It's not spitting the bit and going your own way. It's saying, God, I really believe, I trust, I have enough trust in you that I actually believe that your plan for my life is better than my own. Isn't that the hardest battle every one of us fights? Is to believe that God has our best interest at heart. Meekness is saying, God, I trust you. You're the master, and I want to go where you want me to go. I want to do what you want me to do. I want to experience what you want me to experience. So put this bit in my mouth and lead me where you want me to go. Put my strength under your control. Say this with me. Meekness is not weakness. It's strength under control. Okay. So, what is meekness? We've got it down. It's strength under God's control. So now we ask ourselves the question, are there any models for this? And I think I've got a few that you'll appreciate. Just kind of like the who's who of the Old Testament, they were all meek people. Think about Abraham and Lot. Think about the day that Lot came up to him and said, hey, we need to separate. There's not enough land to take care of all your massive flocks and all my massive flocks. And Abraham was the older one. He was the more important one. He was the one who had heir to the land. But what does he say? He says, let's not argue. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Whatever you want. And here is this one who could have demanded his way, but in a financial matter, he says, look, I'm going to be meek. My strength is under control. I'm going to leave some on the table. I'm going to let you pick first. I'm going to show you that I don't have to dominate this. I'm going to let you make the decision. Moses shows us meekness and leadership. He asked God to take the leadership qualities, the spirit that he had, and to place it upon everyone else. Look what he said. Don't be jealous on my account. Here's what I wish. I wish that all the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would place his spirit on every one of them. Moses said, I don't want to be special. I don't want to be the one that has more spirit than everybody else. I wish God would take what's on me and give it to everybody. What a meek spirit. Now notice this passage, which obviously, can I point out that we all believe that Moses wrote Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, okay? But there were some edits to this, and here's one. I'm quite confident that Moses did not write these words, okay? You want to read them? Look what it says. It says, now the man Moses was very meek, more than all the people who were on the face of the earth at his time. Oh, that was his secret, is that his strength was under God's control. How about David? Oh, David modeled something that Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount. Remember what Jesus said? If somebody slaps you, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to keep your strength under control, and you are to turn the other cheek. If someone steals your jacket, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to keep your strength under control and say, do you need a shirt too? David was being chased by Saul. Saul was trying to kill David. What does David do? He pulls his knife, cuts a piece of Saul's garment, and says, look, God gave you into my hand, and I spared you. Meekness in conflict. Or how about Joseph? Joseph and his brothers, they tried to kill him. They sold him into slavery. They left him for dead. At the end of his life, they were afraid that he was going to do them in after their father died. And look at this meek spirit of Joseph. You intended what you did to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is being done, the saving of many lives. And so what we discover is that God's people that we admire in the Old Testament, many of them were known for their meekness, that their strength was under God's control. And that's what allowed God to use them, to bless them, to make a difference through them. So, here we are to the third part, Jesus' secret to meekness. Now, what we need to understand about Jesus is that he's called the Lion of Judah. Strength under control. What do we learn from him? Well, there's 3 verses that I want us to look at just briefly, and then we'll summarize and the lesson will be yours. The first verse that I want us to look at, I would like us to read silently but slowly. Okay? So let's look at this verse, and I'd like for you to read it silently and slowly, believing that if Jesus, the life coach, were here today, you'd be willing to pay $1,000 an hour to hear what he had to say. You would. You'd pay $1,000 in a heartbeat just to spend an hour with him saying, help me improve my life. Help me make sense of my life. Help me to take back control of my life. And so here's the first verse that I want us to read slowly and quietly. You ready? Go. What'd that say to you? Let's look at another one. You ready? This one we're going to read slowly and out loud together. You ready? Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. One more. Let me read it for you. Just absorb it. Close your eyes even if you'd like. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened down, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy. My burden is light. Let's think about it for just a second. First, what Jesus wants for every one of us, and the secret to meekness, is understanding that the God life comes when we turn control over to God. And Jesus says the way to do that is to be yoked with Christ. To put our head on one side of the yoke and to let Jesus be on the other side and let him be our life coach. Show us how to live. Walk through life with us. Let him teach us how we can live an unburdened, non-anxious, non-despairing way of living. Free from burden, free from the tyranny of the urgent, ready to walk at the pace of the Master. Jesus teaches us to live freely and lightly. And that's his invitation to us. Number two, in a world filled with hurry, with chasing after more, never slowing down, filling every moment, being burdened by the tyranny of more and more and more, Jesus invites us to move at his pace. Come yoke yourself with me and let me teach you the rhythms of life. How to live life at a pace that is full and free and joyous and beautiful. Number 3, meekness is God's invitation to understand that you can't have it all, you can't do it all, you can't experience it all, you just can't do everything. That's what the world wants to say, right? But you can't. But here's the good news. Jesus says, you can't do it all, but you can do everything I want you to do. You can do everything that I've marked out for you to do. You won't miss anything that God has stored up for you if you'll place my yoke upon you and learn from me and accept the limitations that come with trusting that I have your best interest at heart. The meek can say yes when Jesus says yes, and no when Jesus says no. Have you noticed that as Christians, one of the hardest things we ever say is no? When you're yoked with Jesus, you can say no, because that's not where he's leading you to go. So, how many of us would like a little rest? Rest for our soul. And the confidence of knowing we're living the life that God has marked out for us at the pace God has marked it out for us. Is that what you want? How many of us, our life feels like this next slide? Raise your hand if this next slide describes the way you feel sometimes, okay? Nobody raised their hand but me. Okay, there's a few of us. Yeah, don't you feel sometimes like you're doing it all by yourself? That you're not yoked with the Lord? That the burden on the back is way too much? And that you've just kind of lost it? Jesus says, that's not the life that I marked out for you. There's a better way. There's a better way. The meek who have turned over the reins of their life, trusting in the Master, there's a better way. Jesus will say it this way in Mark chapter 8. If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will find it. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world but forfeit his soul? Or what will a man exchange for his soul? Jesus says, you got to take up your cross and follow me. Don't chase after the good life and lose your soul. We know that in a world where people are living this way, Jesus invites us to live this way. To be the meek who walk with God through life and find in him one who allows us not to chase after the whole world, but to inherit everything that God has in store for us because we've turned over the reins of our life to God. Do you want everything that God has in store for you? Do you want it? Thoreau went to Walden Pond and he said, I went there because I wanted to suck the marrow out of life. I didn't want to come to the end of life and discover that I didn't really live. And if you know Thoreau, you know he died a miserable man because he went chasing after the good life and he missed the God life. But what Jesus says is, come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened down, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn the rhythms of my life and discover the rest, the joy, the peace that I have for your soul. His yoke is easy, his burden is light. What do we need to do to be right with him? Lord, reign in me. Take my strength, put it under your control. You are the master. I am the clay. Let's give our life back to him. And if you've never committed your life to Christ for the first time, if you need to commit to him in baptism, we're not in a hurry. We are headed to camp, but we're not in a hurry. And we encourage anyone who's subject to the call of Christ to come as we stand and sing.